Hi everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of Competency Corner Live. So happy you could come back and join us. My name is Sarah Beckett. I'm the host of this monthly show. It's very excited to introduce Lorraine McKay, our special guest today. Welcome, Lorraine. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Hello, everyone.
So Lorraine, of course, is one of the co-founders of HRSG as well as our CMO. So much knowledge to share. And we really look forward to hearing all the answers to all of the questions that were submitted. So before we get started, and we will get started very soon because we do have a ton of questions that were submitted in advance. So thank you so much to everyone who signed up, who registered, who sent those questions in. We are so excited about all of this engagement. But Lorraine and I were at a really great event last week.
Yeah.
It was the CATA Innovation and Leadership Award. So, I mean, CATA, as always, puts on an amazing event. But Lorraine, did you have anything you want to add on that?
It's a leading question.
A little bit.
So these CATA Awards are to recognize leaders in the technology space in Canada. And our CEO and founder, Dr. Suzanne Simpson, was awarded the Sarah Kirk Award for a woman who's a business leader in the field of technology. So we were thrilled that Suzanne won this award, and so well deserved.
Yeah, and you know, it was amazing to be there, see all of the amazing people who were award recipients, hear their stories. I mean, the technology is changing right now so rapidly. All of, you know, everything around AI, machine learning. Yeah. It is so cool to see all of these absolutely brilliant people and all the amazing work that they're doing. So it was really great. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into the questions now. We've got, as I said, quite a few. So our first question comes to us from Kanitha. So Kanitha asks, Lorraine, some managers and leaders, including employees, find using competencies in career pathing to be very cumbersome. So how can we make it simple, practical, and, you know, but still be the go-to approach for leaders and staff?
For sure. Well, you know, things were a lot simpler when you looked at your career path in terms of what's the experience I need for the next job. Yeah. But we saw that was a very subjective approach. And so a lot of more organizations wanted to add more rigor and recognize people for the competencies they bring to a job. You know, key competencies like problem solving and analytics and teamwork and all kinds of competencies. But when you add more information like that, it's going to make a system a little more complex. So what I recommend to organizations is, first of all, look at the number of competencies that you're including in your jobs within your career path system. Sometimes organizations list too many competencies, and this makes it cumbersome. So really, you should only be focusing on that set of competencies that are real differentiators. You know, 10 would be a maximum number we often look at. And then more importantly, you need a system to do this. So you need a software system that shows employees the jobs and the competencies, makes it easy for them to look at them, to self-reflect on their own competencies and plan their career. Yeah. So those are really the two recommendations I would make to simplify your career path system.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lorraine. I think that was pretty comprehensive. So we're going to move on to our next question that comes to us from Pamela. This is another good one. Okay. So I'm interested in competency-based job descriptions to support performance management and review. We need to develop organizational and job-specific competencies. So what process steps would you recommend, and what shortcut solutions are available to save time?
Right. So I'm going to talk about the process for developing what we call a competency framework. Yeah. And a competency framework is that set of competencies that is needed by your organization and by the jobs to be successful. Okay? So along with those competencies, you need to identify what are the most critical competencies for each job. And typically, this will include a combination of what's referred to by Pamela as organizational competencies, which are what are those competencies that link to the values and the vision of the organization to drive performance, along with the technical competencies needed by a specific job. So those are really the two sets of tools that you're looking at, and you need to add some planning up front. So one of the questions you'll ask are, what's this combination? How many competencies? And you need to involve people. It's a very consultative process. So what is that going to look like? So shortcuts. Well, first of all, purchase a competency library. And this is going to be your biggest time saver because you'll buy a well-researched set of competencies to use, and that will immediately cut down your development time by more than 50%. In addition, you can buy profiles off the shelf that for different jobs identify the key competencies. So those are your two biggest time-saving tools. Software can be used to survey people to pick the most important competencies. So these are really the three foundation tools, a defined process and methodology for you to follow, and HRSG provides all of these tools and a toolkit to give you that methodology.
And I love that people are starting to talk about competency-based job descriptions, because this is something we've been talking about for a while, but we're really starting to see that trend of the job descriptions and the competency profiles coming together. So enhancing just, those standard job descriptions that talk about, what some of those key tasks are, but, allowing that, the competency to describe better about how things should be done, how can you have success. I think this is a really great trend that we're seeing with a lot of our clients, but in the broader market as well. So it's pretty cool. So our next question, Lorraine, comes from, I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, Oluwatusen. So how do you build a competency framework? It's pretty broad. So what are some of the key considerations that should go into building this framework and to making sure that it fits within the context of my organization?
Well, in the last question, I talked about what a competency framework was. So what are some of these key considerations? Organizational competencies, often we'll call them core competencies. These are the competencies needed by all jobs, by all employees, and they really drive performance. So many organizations will consider competencies like innovation or analytical skills is becoming more and more popular in our data-driven environment. Competencies like client focus and teamwork. So these can all be very critical competencies needed by everyone, along with leadership competencies. So there's a couple of important considerations there. And as I mentioned before, the combination of competencies that you're going to use, how are you going to start out? Are you going to start out just with core? Are you going to go right away and add these job-specific technical competencies? That's an important consideration, along with how do you engage people, how are you going to communicate, and how are you going to use the competencies? That's really probably the most important question.
Thanks, Lorraine. I mean, some of that stuff is stuff that comes up really every month in competency in our life. It's so much of it is about conveying that, the what's in it for me. That whole communications program around it's a change management process. So making sure that you're really defining that and communicating that to all of your stakeholders will really make sure that your initiative is a success. Okay, so our next question comes from Yusuf. So this is a cool one. So how, Lorraine, can competencies help an organization boost productivity?
Okay, that's good. I think about my own day and some of the challenges I wrestle with, and probably this is going to ring true for many of you. So in my day, I get a lot of emails. I have a big to-do list. There's lots of things I have to read. And how do I allocate my time? How do I decide what's most important? And this is what competencies do. They focus. They help an individual focus on what's important. And I think about a customer service rep. They need to demonstrate client focus. And what does that mean? Well, the competency defines really what's needed to demonstrate client focus, like listening to the client, like being respectful to the client, delivering standards, whether it's on-time standards or quality, and really being responsive. So these are the key behaviors, and this will help focus the employee on what's important, demonstrating these critical competencies that the organization has identified. So focus is really important. And I think about the research that's been done that's related to productivity. And Brandon Hall did a great paper based on an extensive survey they did and published this paper about 6 months ago. And it had some key results. And these results were that for organizations that have an effective competency framework, revenue is increased by 55%. And as well for employee engagement, this increases by about 37% for organizations that have a competency framework. So these organizations are focusing employees on what's important, what behavior is needed, and they're driving really tangible results that do, of course, relate to productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks, Lorraine. Okay, so our next question. So this is, again, something we hear, a lot from clients. So this comes to us from Thomas. Thank you very much, Thomas, for your question. So what is the most common reason for failure of competency implementation? We don't like talking about the bad stuff, but
yeah,
sometimes these projects don't go on. They're not successful.
This is so easy. It's failure to implement, just not implementing. There are so many organizations that will build the competencies and then they stop there and they don't implement, they don't use them in their talent management processes. You have to do this. And often we will recommend to clients, start with one part of their organization, an organization that has a need for competencies. So say it's salespeople. Say you have a lot of turnover of salespeople. Start there. Use the competencies in recruitment. Use a test to assess competencies. Use interview questions to evaluate competencies. This is how you start implementing. And once you've implemented, then you can evaluate your success and move on and learn from it. But you have to implement. You have to do this right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do a lot of case studies and best practice interviews with some of our clients. One of the messages I've heard from a number of different clients when they're talking about lessons learned is you're never going to get it perfect the first time. So as Lorraine said, you just need to implement. You're never going to hit that,
That's a good point.
all the competencies perfect right away.
Yeah.
And things change so rapidly now. Jobs change, the workforce is changing, that you need to be able to, implement, move ahead, and refine over time. So I think that's another good point.
And there's many key tools to use in implementation. And but these are common to any program in HR that you're implementing. You need to provide training. You need to provide support. You need to provide tools to help employees use the competencies. So all of those things go without saying, but it really starts with committing to implementing.
Great, thanks. Okay, so our next question is from Mohammed. So this is interesting. So what leadership competency framework is recent and reliable to use?
Okay. We asked ourselves this question a few years ago when we looked at enhancing our leadership competencies. And the model that we had used previously was more of a focus on management competencies. Things like problem solving, managing budget, managing resources, etc. But we really needed to focus on leadership, modern leadership. So we looked at transformational leadership. And we relied on the literature that really looked at leadership to transform an organization and move it ahead, whether it's in a growth or a change environment. And these are leadership competencies like fostering innovation and managing change and inspiring others and creating a vision. So these are the important leadership competencies that we have built and that many organizations have started using, because these are the ones that will take their organization to the next level.
Yeah. And there is a huge body of research that goes into these transformational competencies. So, that's, as Lorraine said, the model that we chose to use, but I'm sure there are other similar ones.
Right.
But they, often draw back to those same kinds of things. So, okay, our next question, Lorraine, is from, and I think we've got 5 minutes left, so we've got time for a few more. This is from Harira. So this is another communications question. Okay. So what is the most effective way to communicate the competency model to a workforce in such a way that they can understand it and adapt to those, the changes that come with implementing that?
Right. In our early days of competency work, we asked ourselves this, how do we communicate? And we spent a lot of time communicating up front. These are the competencies we're going to introduce. This is how we're developing them. But we found that what's most important to people is, how does this affect me? How are these competencies relevant to me? And so we found that by actually using the competencies in an application was the best way to communicate. So again, it goes back to implementing. When you start using the competencies, say in career development, employees, they see what the competencies are, what the behaviors are, they think about how they relate to them, how they need to demonstrate them, how they need to learn them, and it makes them real. So this is really an important way to communicate. Other ways are important as well. You need your leadership to endorse them, to communicate the competencies in the context of the values and the vision for your organization. You need managers to describe these to employees, to get them engaged in using them. Use PowerPoints and tip sheets to help managers explain this. We've had effective use of videos that we've created to explain how the competencies are going to be used. So all of these tools, these change management tools, are important, but nothing replaces using them in a practical application.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lorraine. That was great. Okay, so another question here. This is from Tracy. What do you find are the most effective tools for career pathing?
Okay. Career pathing, such an important topic these days. So I'm going to list what some of the research shows that are the most important tools and the ways that you need to engage employees. So the first thing is, you need to show to the employee what the jobs are in your organization, and not just what the jobs are, but you have to describe them. So you need your job descriptions. You need to describe what experience and competencies are needed in each job, so that employees can understand what jobs could be along their career path and of interest. The second thing you need to do is give them tools to make the decision, what is my next best job? And what does that mean, the next best job? Well, it could be, this is my next best fit. This is the job that I have the best experience and competencies for. It could be, this is a desirable job. This is a job that interests me, that is in a geography I'm interested in. So give them these tools to make decisions and plan their path. The third thing is, you need to give them self-directed learning tools, which normally would consist of a combination of experiences, experiential learning, online learning, and knowledge sharing within a community. So people need to be able to develop for their next job. And fourthly, maybe most importantly, is the organization needs to move from thinking about a career path that is hierarchical, that is along a promotional hierarchy, to one that looks at more career lattices, moving laterally, because careers now and career development is more about gaining different experiences, more experience, and gaining the competencies that the individual is interested in. So I think those are really your essential tools. Of course, software is so important in pulling all this together and managing all this information and flow for the employee.
Great. Thanks, Lorraine. So we're just at our 20 minutes, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question that we just received here. So this is from Barbara. Thanks, Barbara, for sending that in. So Lorraine, how do you effectively facilitate a training on competencies and their definitions so management evaluates their employees correctly?
Right. Okay. So, you know, the most important thing about evaluating employees is making sure there's objectivity, okay? That you're not making subjective decisions. And what's important here is having your, whether it's a competency or a qualification or knowledge, you need to define it in clear terms that are measurable, so that there is objectivity. What if you can see it and observe it, you can measure it. And so this is why we've put so much time into defining our competencies, so that they are accurate and they lead to that objectivity. So that's really a key aspect. Giving some training to managers about how to objectively assess someone, how to avoid common mistakes like what we call the halo effect, or you know, introducing bias is also very helpful. Introducing maybe a validation, a verification. If the employee himself or herself is assessing themselves, get verification from somebody else, a peer, a supervisor. So that helps again with the objectivity. Providing rationale for why you're rating someone so high or so low also helps you think about why you're giving that rating and what the evidence is behind it. So these are all recommendations I would make.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. And Barbara, we can touch base and see if we've answered your question effectively. And that goes for everybody else as well. We will be following up as we normally do with all your answers. So thank you so much to everybody for taking time to join us. Thank you, Lorraine, for being here and answering all the questions. And we will be back next month with our next edition of Competency Corner Live. And we have a special treat planned, so stay tuned for that. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye.